Hey guys, this is Ben with Tilmor, and today we're going to build a drop box for your 520 tractor. Before we get started here at the case, we're going to press a bearing onto our small gear, and when you press that bearing on, only press it on the spline side. We'll put the bearing on the other side later. So go over here to the press and put that on. And when you press the bearings on, make sure that you're not pressing on the rollers. To have the best results is to get something that completely covers the bearing just like that. So you're careful not to damage the actual bearing. All right, since we got that pressed on, let's set that off to the side. Next, we're going to install our oil seals, and these can be put in backwards. So take note when you're putting them in. The open side of the seal always goes towards the oil. So we'll put this one in, and then we'll put the other one in as well. Same thing when you're pressing those. Just get yourself a nice flat piece of steel and make sure it goes clear over the seal. So you don't want to press on the rubber part, and you want to make sure you get it pressed evenly so you don't damage it and what will cause a leak then later on. All right, that seal's installed. Let's go ahead and install our other seal. So it's going to want to go in just like that. All right, now that we got our bearing installed and both seals on, ready to go to the drop box. You may think though, if I don't have a press, I can't build this drop box. You can. You can do it with a hammer and a punch. Just make sure you have a good squared off punch, and make sure you have a solid surface to pound on. Always have your safety goggles on when you're using any kind of tools. But just be careful when you're pounding with a punch or installing these seals that you don't damage them in the process. But now we're gonna go over here. We're gonna move to the case. You wanna get the larger case, the one that is bigger and heavier. That's one you're going to want to start with. First, you're going to want to take your magnet. Don't forget your magnet, because if you get to a certain step, this magnet will not go into the case. You'll have to take the big gear back off. So I always, step one is my magnet, and that magnet goes right there. After you get your magnet installed, you're going to want to get your big pack of bearings. It's going to come basically bread tied together and wrapped in plastic. I can show you what a new one will look like. If you buy a bearing pack from us, this is what it's going to come in. So when you get this pack of bearings, don't just open it up and throw it all over the table. It's stacked in there in a specific order, and you want to put it in that specific order right down into the case. And so I always like to keep bearing and race together, and you'll see that it has a spacer here. That spacer is pre-cut, and I always like to keep that spacer touching the same bearing that it comes out of the pack with. So I always stack it over here off to the side. I put a O and an I outside and inside, and I just stack them so that I always know which one goes where. First though, unstack it, grab your two snap rings, and if you look down in here, there is a groove right down in there. That's where those snap rings are going to go. And take a big pair of snap ring pliers, and let's go ahead and install those snap rings. And what I always like to do is make sure they rotate in that groove. That way you know you got them in the groove. And I always offset the openings. So I put an opening to the left and then an opening to the right. That way there's a good surface for the races to be pushed against. Click it in, make sure it moves freely. After you get the snap rings in, now we're going to go ahead and put our bearing races in. We're going to use our press, but you can install these with a hammer and a squared off chisel or punch. They make an actual race punch that I've used in the past that works really well, and you're less likely to damage the race or the bearing when you're installing it with one of those. So grab your bearing that you're going to put on the outside, grab that race, and then we'll go ahead and we'll put it on the outside. So these races can be put in backwards, so take note when you're putting them in that you're putting them in correctly. Now when you got your press all set up, just set your bearing in just like that. So if you see this side's a little smaller, it has a little bigger surface, that is going to go down and sit against your snap rings. Just take this piece right here and we'll press them in. And bottom the races out against the snap ring. Go ahead and we will flip this over. And grab a race that is for the inside bearing. And again, the wide side, the more open side, it comes up. The side with a little bigger surface goes against the snap rings. Get it set down in there like that. All right, that's installing the races. Make sure you get them bottomed out in there. And we'll go back over here to the table and we'll start assembling it. Now that you got your both races in, both snap rings in, go ahead and flip it so it's sitting like this, and grab your bearing that you have designated for the outside of the case and stick it in there like that. Make sure it's smooth in there. I always pre-lube the bearings. Just put a small amount of hydraulic oil on the bearing and go ahead and grab this one that we put the bigger seal in. You're going to see a small O-ring groove here. Grab one of these rubber O-rings and put it in that groove. One thing I like to do just to be a little bit more precautious that hopefully we don't have a leak later on is I just put a small amount of silicone just around that seal, just like that. That way if there's any imperfections in the machining or any kind of burrs, that silicone will take that up. And I set it down there, it will sit in place, and I just kind of move it just back and forth a little bit to make sure that the O-ring's seated in the groove and everything's good down in there. Next, you'll take your spindle protector. With the bent pieces, you'll want to stick those up just like that. And then you're going to take your longer 5/16 bolts. Should be 6 of them. And you just want to put a small amount of blue Loctite on each one. Just like that. Start them all in there before you tighten any of them. All right, after you get them all started, you're good to tighten them. It's going to be a 1/2 inch socket. And just go ahead and tighten them up. Just tighten them in a star pattern. All right, you got those tightened. Go ahead and flip it over. Set it just like that. And then you're going to grab this gear that we put one bearing on. And you have the spline side. That is going to be the side that is going to go down. Just like that. And we'll take a rubber mallet and just pound that in. You hear the sound change. It's more of a higher pitch sound when it gets bottomed out. If you're struggling to get it to go in there, just make sure it's centered and square. You've seen when I first started to hit on it, it wasn't going in straight, so I had to hit on this side of the gear to get it to go more in straight. So that's what it's going to look like. Now what we're going to do is grab our spindle over here, and we always take just a small amount of grease, and the bearings and the races and the snap rings are going to end up right in this area. So we just take a small amount of grease, just brush it around like that. I put a very small amount where the seal's going to ride. That way it helps it all slide together a lot easier. Bring your spindle over here, and you're going to want to take this case, pick it up, and just set it down on that spindle. Just like that. And make sure it starts to slide down on there. You can kind of work it down on, but if you get it set on there just like that, you're going to want to take the bearing that you designated for the inside and slip it down over that shaft. But just make sure that this little spacer here is in between your bearings, because if you forget that spacer, you will over tighten it and it will not turn. So, and make sure that it's oriented correctly how it came out of the package. So I just take it and just slide it down right over like that and just drop it in. I also pre-lube this bearing. And once again, just spin it, make sure everything feels smooth, you don't have any rough spots. Now's the time to change anything if we need to. Next, what we're going to do is grab our spacer, and it's going to have an open side and a closed side. You're going to want to set it down with the open side down towards those first bearings. It'll sit just like that. Next, what we're going to grab is our big gear. And when you're setting this in here, just be careful. But you need to line these teeth up so it slides together, but also there's splines in here that you're going to want to have to line up. And you just kind of have to turn it, and it'll drop right down on. What we're going to want to do is what I normally try to do is pound this gear on just enough so the bearing will start. If that doesn't work, you can always pull it on with the nut, but let's go ahead and let's drive this down. I drove it down just enough that shaft, there's a little bit of a lip on that shaft. You'll grab, it's the little bit heavier duty bearing. It's got a smaller inside. It will not fit on that top gear, so that's how you know. They're all different enough that they'll only go in one spot. So take that, and you'll kind of make sure you got it centered on there and set it down over that shaft. You'll have a big flat washer. That washer goes like that, and then that nut goes down on there like that. You can pre-lube the threads with just a little bit of hydraulic oil. Just helps assembly. And I always just put a little bit of oil down in there. So then we'll go over here, we'll grab the big impact. The socket's going to be 1 13/16 is what you're going to need. If you don't have 1 13/16, a 47 will also work. So let's go ahead and let's tighten this. You want to bottom it out, but you also have to bottom it out and get these notches to line up with one of the holes in the shaft, because we'll go ahead and we'll put a cotter pin through there. So you may have to go a little bit tighter. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that. It's all bottomed out, it's lined up. But what I like to do is I like to hold the case and wiggle this gear. And what you have to make sure is this gear, everything is all tight and compressed together. And that gear is tight on those splines. But also, you want to spin it and make sure you don't get your fingers down in there. It'll pinch you. But you want to spin it around, just make sure everything's nice and free. Take your cotter pin and slide your cotter pin through. And go ahead and bend that cotter pin over. I just take a small pair of pliers. I always put the long side up. You grab the long side, fold it over, hit that over like that, and hit that one down. So it gives it a neat look, but it'll never come out of there. If that nut does start to come loose, that cotter pin will hold it from coming completely off. So, but I like to do it like that because it looks a lot neater, and that's how I was showed how to do it. Okay, now since we got all that, we are ready to put the top case on. And like I said, I mentioned at the beginning, the magnet, you think if you forget the magnet, you'll be able to get it down through one of those holes. It doesn't fit, you can't get it in there. We've been there, you have to pull the gear back off. So, and that magnet is very crucial because when it's running around in there, any metal that flakes off or whatever, any kind of debris, it will get stuck on there. It kind of acts as your filter. But now, make sure these surfaces are clean. Let's go ahead and we're going to put silicone clear around and on the inside of the holes. And you can be generous with your silicone because this is going to act like your gasket. We use silicone because it's way more forgiving than the gaskets and it seals a lot better. And when you are looking for silicone, you're going to want the RTV. It's the best for oil. I came from diesel mechanics and we use that stuff on all of our big heavy duty transmissions, the big heavy duty rear ends. We use that stuff and it worked really, really well. Now what you're going to do is take the smaller case and go ahead and you're just going to set it down on there. Make sure you don't pinch your fingers. And you don't want to get your fingers in the silicone either because it makes a big mess. So it'll just slide down right over that top bearing. Slide down on, and I like to throw a couple bolts in here just to kind of hold it in place. Those bolts are their 7/16, and they just have an SF nut on them. But now what you're going to want to do is take the other bearing and pound it, get it started down on the smaller gear. You just want to pound it on just enough that it starts on the gear and it starts in the case. That way, if you have to come back apart, you can. So now you'll go through and you'll take two little dowels. You're going to see two holes right here. You want to pound those dowels in, and I will make sure you have safety glasses on these because they are slightly challenging to get in and sometimes you have to hit them pretty hard. Okay, get those in, and let's put all of our 7/16 bolts in. Start the nuts. The nuts are we'll take 11/16. Most of the time with an SF nut, you don't have to use a wrench. If you can get it clear up against the case, it kind of acts as a lock nut and it'll hold itself there. And then the bolt head is a 5/8. So go ahead and tighten those. And I like to tighten either side, and then we'll spin it, make sure everything's okay. And now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and pound that bearing down in. When you're pounding it in, you want to make sure the best would maybe to put a flat piece of steel on there or concentrate that you're hitting on the center of the bearing. So then go ahead and tighten this in a star pattern. And then you want to spin it. Make sure it sounds even, make sure it's not catching, it's spinning nice and smooth. Let's go ahead and we can lube this bearing up. And then you're going to grab your other cover that we put the seal in at first, and it's going to sit down on there just like that. Take some of your black RTV silicone and just put a small amount. Just like that. Set it down on there. Grab 3 of your shorter 5/16 bolts. Put a small amount of Loctite on them. I have had a couple of them after you put that cover on, they're a little bit tight. And I found that taking and cracking that cover with a mallet kind of helps center everything up. And just check, make sure they're good and tight. Go ahead and spin that, make sure everything's free. Next, you're going to get the cover like this. There's an O-ring groove in it. If you have an older tractor, this cover is going to be black. If you have a newer tractor, this cover is going to be a silver color. So put that O-ring in that groove. And once again, I just put a small amount of silicone on there just for another layer of protection. Because once you get this on the tractor, you don't want to have to take it apart for a small leak or something like that. So try to cover all of our bases when we're building them here in the factory. But go ahead, and that just sits down on there just like that. I spin it just to make sure that that O-ring's in the groove. And that one is 6 of the smaller 5/16, the shorter 5/16 bolts. Put Loctite on those. Tighten these in a star pattern. The reason we tighten everything in a star pattern so you get even, it's not pulling down on one side and then you gotta bind it to pull down the other side. So it just helps you get an even tightness clear around. So that's it, that's that side of it. And then kind of lay it down on the table and you're gonna see this cover over here. That cover right there, that is where the snap ring for your axle is going to ride. If you're putting a drop box together, that cover, don't put it on yet. Here in the factory, we just put them on loose. That way we don't lose pieces, So this drop box is ready to go ahead and put on your tractor. You're going to want to add the correct amount of fluid, refer to the sticker under the seat of your tractor. Make sure you have your breather and your plug oriented in the right spot. But make sure you're adding fluid to this before you put it on the tractor. It makes it a whole lot easier. But this drop box is ready to go on the tractor after we add fluid to it. So thanks for watching. If you guys have any more questions, need any help with anything, please reach out. We're here to help. Thank you.